Welcome to On the Beat, where we bring you a different Buffalo Bills beat reporter every week, exclusively on the Overreaction Sports Network.
Well, what is going on, everybody? Welcome everybody into another edition of On the Beat on the Overreaction Sports Network, powered by Believe. My name is Joe Miller, and you can find me on Twitter at Joe Miller Wired. Alongside, it seems to be every week now, John Fina, my co-host, the lovely and attractive John Fina with the olive skin, unlike my pink Irish skin. We are excited to have every single one of you joining us right now live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Do us a favor. Whatever platform that you are consuming this video on, please please subscribe. Also, if you're watching or listening to this in post as a podcast, please please subscribe. We are so excited to have you guys with us, though. Welcome to everybody joining us in the comments section. The last couple of weeks, we've been doing a very unique thing here on The Beat. Instead of interviewing a Bills beat reporter, week one of this series, this 3-week series, we had Antoine Staley for the New York Jets beat reporter. Last week, we had Alan Pupar, Miami Dolphins beat reporter. And this week, we are super excited to have from the Boston Sports Journal, Mike Giardi. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Joe and John, great to be with you. I'll tell you what, I spent so much time in Buffalo that I still remain very emotionally invested and connected to the Bills Mafia and the way they treated me for the 5 years that I was working at NFL Network, and certainly spent a ton of time in Buffalo over that period of time. So I'm happy to be with you guys.
Yeah, super excited to have you. I guess it begs the question, favorite wing joint?
Yeah, gotta ask.
Can I table that till the end of the conversation? Okay.
Absolutely. We'll give you a pass.
Well, you have to answer, but we're not going to ask you blue cheese or ranch. That one will leave alone, right?
That gets kind of nasty after a while, yeah.
What, the blue cheese or the conversation?
Both.
I mean, people take the gloves off of blue cheese over ranch.
I know, right? Like, we were just talking off the air about social media, and like, I think that's one of the places where we kind of were hinting around what's not so great about there sometimes.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
yeah, the blue cheese ranch and the politics. I mean,
yeah, right.
Kind of a toss-up.
They're about the same, right?
Yeah. They're both murderous and full of malintent. So.
Gotcha.
Well, we're really happy to have you. You know, this particular division, AFC East, is just rife with lots of rivalries, old and new, and Bills Mafia. You know, no love lost for Miami, the Jets, or the Patriots. But we feel like it's our duty to bring in guys like Mike Giardi and Alan Pupar, you know, to talk about who we're going to play. I mean, it accounts for 6 games of the season. It's a huge deal. Obviously, the New England Patriots have been a little subdued, if you will, over the past couple of years, but now retooling and getting back together. So we wanted to bring you on to get your insight. You're in the thick of it, and hear about, you know, the new leadership there and the new coaches and the plan really to revive the offense. So I've set the stage. Joe, we can dig in, Mike, and we're excited to hear your response.
Yeah, first question is literally John is talking right about it. You know, there's a new guard in New England, kind of officially. You know, Tom leaving was a big deal, but now that Bill Belichick has moved on, you know, it's Drake Maye's. It's his show now as the new head coach. And I think what's interesting to me is kind of getting to know, have there been like changes? Is there culture changes? Is there practice differences? Like, what have you noticed that's maybe a little bit different than the former regime from a culture, messaging, coaching type of a situation, if anything?
Well, for starters, they erased a lot of the past history under Belichick. Some of the things that were printed all over the walls, those are gone. Gerard and his people have brought in some new quotes, if you will, which I know people get all. To me, the quote thing is like when you're winning, like you were, no days off, all those sorts of things that Belichick liked to throw at you. They're great when you're winning, but the moment you start losing, they just get thrown in your face. So I know that there had been some reporting on some of the things that are on the wall. I don't really care about that. Like, to me, it's all about, you know, what's the leadership going to do with the group that they have? How are they going to change the culture? Because the culture got pretty toxic the last few years, and the coaching staff got weaker and weaker. Belichick sort of kept his guys. You know, it was like, well, I don't want too much pushback. I just want guys that I want to work with. Just like he made the quote to Urban Meyer that Urban repeated, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago about the idea. I just want to coach guys that I like.
Right.
It's not about sort of like, I don't want to deal with the guys that are pains in the butts anymore. Like, I want someone to, when I tell them to do something, they're going to do it. They're going to do it with a smile, and that's that. I don't want any pushback. And I think, look, it hurt the coaching staff. It hurt the on-field product. I think, you know, that you can see the talent deficiency and the erosion of talent over the last 3 or 4 years, which is why this is, I think, a multi-year rebuild. So to me, one of the things they identified about Giardi is, you know, he's not too far removed from being a player, and he was a coach and sort of the good cop, you know, as things were turning sour the last couple of years. And I think there's more of that positivity and those vibes that are going now, where players feel like, at least to this point, again, we're not in the hard part yet, where guys feel like we're being heard, we're being respected, and that's not the way it was before.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great transition, right? I mean, you take somebody who was with the organization in one way, shape, or form, players believe in, connect with, and you can build on those relationships. So hopefully, I mean, for that particular fan base, you know, you can rejuvenate this team, you can create a new culture of communication, of understanding, and it just kind of turn off all the noise and focus on what everybody wants to do, right? Which is raise the Lombardi.
Yeah, to me, this is interesting, though, because this can come back to bite you. And I think it's been a long time since the Patriots had a transition at coach, but it was the Parcells to Pete Carroll back to Belichick, right? So Parcells, obviously, it's my way or the highway, hard ass. Although, you know, when you read about or talk to people about Parcells, there was a little bit more of a, give and take's probably not the right word, but there was a little bit more of a personal relationship that I think Belichick, especially as time went on, eroded with the players. And so when they went to Pete from Parcells, yeah, it was great. Pete was awesome. He's a fun guy, right? He's exciting. Like, hey, players, you know, I'm going to trust you to do the right thing. Well, the players sort of took that rope and they pulled. Oh, we can keep pulling, and the next thing you know, 3 years later, Pete's out, and they've got to go back to the old way. So I'm curious if Giardi can. Generally, I think you'd like to come in as kind of a tough guy with a little bit of a softer edge, and then as time goes on, maybe, and you're having some success, maybe you can get a little bit softer. I think he's come in soft, and now if he has to get more difficult with them, I'm curious to see how that sort of plays.
Yeah, there's some talk around Drake Maye. I think there's some speculation, not concern, but just media wondering, fans wondering, is he gonna be a head coach that pays attention to everything? Is he gonna focus primarily on the defense? And I think that's kind of the question that we have as well. Is he going to be more of a defensive-minded coach and kind of leave the offense to former Buffalo Bill, Alex Van Pelt, who has, I think John actually played with Alex, has a great name, like a great kind of like reputation in the NFL. So where do you think he's going to fit? What have you watched, I guess, is a better question.
Well, from what I've watched, is Giardi going to various stops along the way, right? He's over here watching the quarterbacks, then he's watching the receivers, then he's over to the defensive line. And he has told us that he wants to be more of the CEO type, right? Like, gotcha. I'm going to let my coaches coach. That's what we hired them for. And it's actually interesting because, again, that's sort of in direct contrast to what Bill did. Like, Bill sort of had his hands in everything and sort of micromanaged things. And, you know, in particular, when the offense 2 years ago with Patricia and Joe Judge sort of went sideways and they've never been able to get it back on track, he started becoming really more involved in even like play calling stuff. So I think this is different, and we'll see how it works. But I like the idea. He's got a lot on his plate. You know, they brought in Ben McAdoo, and he's sort of like a general assistant, if you will. But having been a head coach before, even though it didn't go very well with him with the Giants, like, he's seen it, and sort of to be someone that Giardi can lean on. Like, how did you do this? How did you schedule that? And allow him to sort of take big picture and let his people do it. Like DeMarcus Covington, the defensive coordinator, that's a Giardi guy. Like, they kind of came up through the system together a little bit in terms of coaching together. It was a no-brainer that when Mayo got the job, that DeMarcus was going to be the DC, and it was. They weren't interviewing anyone else. That was his gig. So, you know, he trusts DeMarcus to do the thing that DeMarcus has sort of been building to do. DeMarcus probably, if it goes well, it's probably going to be interviewing for head coaching jobs in the next year or two. And the offensive side's a little bit more pieced together, right? Because for as much as, and I've done a lot of digging on Alex Van Pelt, for as much as his reputation as a teacher, especially of quarterbacks, is very high around the league. And he had the title of offensive coordinator with the Browns. He didn't call the plays, right? That's Stefanski's offense, Stefanski's plays. He was the eyes in the skies to sort of help Kevin if things were looking, taking a different approach. Defenses are doing some different things to them, but he hasn't called plays on a daily basis since 2009 with the Bills. So he has been sort of, we have all these hot offensive coordinators, the Zach Robinsons of the world, Bobby Slowick, Drew Petzing from the Cardinals. Those guys all like sort of fast-tracked into those jobs and probably going to fast-track into head coaching jobs if they continue to have success. Alex has sort of been like the OC, and then he's a position coach. Then he's dabbling here, dabbling there. He's 3 years here, 2 years there. Like, he's almost been bypassed. So I wonder how much of, like, there's a lot on his plate because he's got to deal with a young quarterback as well at some point. But, like, I wonder how much of, I'll show you guys. I should have been one of these guys 10, 12, 15 years ago. You bypassed me, and now we're going to get it back on track here. And you're going to say, why didn't we think about Alex Van Pelt this way 10 years ago?
Yeah, super good.
Well,
I
think it cuts both ways, Mike. You bring up a great point. But when you're kind of sitting down in the background and you're either being overlooked or bypassed, like you said, if you're the smart guy, you turn internally. Right. And everything, you're hyper aware of everything. And you really kind of hone your craft based on what you see with just a little less pressure. Right. So, for Alex, I hope he does well other than 2 games this upcoming season. But by and large, I think if he's a smart guy, and I've always known Alex to be a really smart guy, fun loving, players love him. But when it comes down to X's and O's, he knows what he's doing. I think, and everybody would certainly agree with this, it's the situational aspect of the game that great O coordinators and D coordinators really evolve their personality around. So when it really comes to brass tacks, they're setting you up for success, and they're not befuddled, and they're not grasping at straws, and they're not kind of coming to the sideline and saying to players, well, what do you think? I mean, that's, as a player, I'm like, look, I'm one of 11 and I'm out here on an island, and you want to know what I think. We're sailing this ship backwards. I mean, this is rough.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I like your point there because you see it so often on the sidelines. They go to the coordinator, and some of these, even the head coaches, and their head is down, right? And it's almost like they're hearing the game, but they're not necessarily what 2nd and 5. Well, let me go to my menu, and on 2nd and 5 I have this. And I've talked to guys like Brian Daboll and Josh McDaniels, and you can say what you want about Josh as a head coach, but Josh as a coordinator is pretty good, right? Those guys will tell you, for as good as they are at doing that thing, that every week is a challenge, and you're never comfortable. You never feel great. And obviously, as we see, 2 plays into the game, your left tackle hurts his ankle. And that whole thing that you were going to do, now we got to bring the backup, and he's not very good. And so now I got to help. And now all this stuff that we did all week, get rid of that. We got to do this. And to be able to adjust like that, the best ones can do it. The best ones can feel the game. Yeah. They can feel the moment, and they can make the right call and get everybody where they need to be situationally, everything like that. So that's a question, right? Alex hasn't done it for a long time. So he's going to be tested in that regard.
Hey, Mike, let's stay on that, right? We could talk about the defense a little bit later. I think there's a little less to talk about, but offensively, right? Big quarterback draft, Drake Maye, Jacoby Brissett. There's an elder statesman situation with the offensive line. And, I could argue the receiving core looks a little bit like what Buffalo's doing by committee. Well, what to you is kind of the biggest challenge? Well, what do they have to overcome? Is it offensive line? Is it quarterbacking? Is it receiver? And maybe give us a little bit of depth into specifics, especially along that tackle spot.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, they tried to address a bunch of different things this offseason, but they knew we're not going to be able to do this in one offseason. There was, as I mentioned, the erosion of talent. So they're going to try Chuks Okorafor at left tackle. Now, he played right tackle 95% of the time for Pittsburgh. Obviously ran afoul with the coaching staff last year. They released him. He's been working predominantly at left tackle. They feel good about that. Now, whether they feel good about that because that's all they have there and they have to talk that up. Caden Wallace, they drafted in the 3rd round out of Penn State. He's a right tackle at Penn State exclusively. Hasn't played left tackle since since high school. He played some in the Senior Bowl. The Senior Bowl. And they tried him a little bit at left tackle here during the spring, but he finished up on the right side, which I think is just, it makes sense. He's probably one of their best 5. So I think they're going to just try to figure out the 5 best and get him out there regardless of necessarily slots and figure it out. But to me, that's a huge issue. Is the line play the last 2 years has been pretty horrific, quite frankly.
Yeah,
and
you add Cole Strange, right? Maybe not available until the middle of the season.
And that'll be from what I can gather, it'll be lucky if it's midseason. Like there's a lot to overcome there. The patellar tendon was messed up, and that whole process happened late in the year. So just a bad. I mean, whatever. Injury's a bad time at any time.
In addition, I don't know who's frozen. If it's me or the rest
None
of
of
the
us.
gang.
No, we're good.
It was me. To me, offensive line wise, it looks like there's a little bit of a depth issue too.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, so we saw a lot of different combinations this spring, and some of that it can be just, hey, we're trying to build depth. See, as I mentioned, I think they've talked about here in the last 2 months about finding the best 5 and figuring out a way to make it work. But Wallace has been at guard, he's been at left tackle, he's been at right tackle, and Wenu started at right tackle. They signed him to the pretty big contract this offseason, which I think was a priority. They knew he's a good player. Now maybe he's not the player that he's getting paid to be, but that's free agency, right? But then by the end of camp, the mandatory minicamp, he was at right guard again. And some people are like, well, you're paying him how much to be a right guard? And I'm like, well, first of all, remember how much money got paid out to guards this year. Like the market is changing again. And he's your best guy up there. David Andrews is the solid, know where he's going to be. He's going to be your center. He's 31, he's long in the tooth, but he's still playing good ball. So you feel good about that spot. But then other than that, it's like they drafted 3 kids last year, 2 years ago, to play on the interior. City So, Antonio Maffey, Jake Andrews. Andrews wasn't on the field at all this spring. Maffey was playing some center. He still doesn't look like he's in the best of shape. So looks like he's going to be the left guard. But it's again, a ton of moving parts. And you could tell me what's it going to be on week 1? And then do you think it's going to be that way in week 6 if everybody stays healthy? And I'd say probably not. I think there's going to be some moving parts there.
Right. Talking Patriots with Mike Giardi from Boston Sports Journal. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, Mike. At Antonio Maffey, I'm very familiar with him. He played at UCLA with my son. That's a big boy. So
he's huge.
I always thought the same thing about him, and then I was always surprised at how well he moved and how well he lasted in a 4-quarter game. So I root for him just because he's one of my boys' old teammates. But given what you said about the offensive line, how do you then reconcile what do you do with Drake Maye, Jacoby Brissett? Like, do you run the risk of, it could go both ways. If you put Maye in there and he has a terrible season, the risk is mentally, right? They never talk too much about that. Like, you could just go and lay an egg and it hurts you for the rest of your career. We've seen it happen. Or do you just say, well, we're going to risk it, chalk it up to a bad season on a rebuild? Or do you put Jacoby in there and keep it a little bit more settled?
Yeah, John, I think Alex told us, near the end of the spring stuff that Jacoby Brissett's the starter. I think we've all been operating under that assumption that Jacoby's going to start the year as the quarterback. And really, to me, the only thing that could change that is if Drake dramatically, I don't just mean outplays him, but I think dramatically outplays him in August. And then maybe there's a conversation to be had like, okay, I know we talked about the kid needs to improve his footwork and maybe some of his decision making, but like he's learning and picking it up quickly and like everybody can see it. Like he's the guy and he's the guy for now and we'll live with it. But I think the plan is that Jacoby's going to be the seat warmer, and whether that he's warming the seat for a month or 8 games or 12 games, whatever it may be, until they feel comfortable with what they have in front of him, what they have surrounding him in terms of weapons, and where they feel Drake is with his development. I mean, it's interesting because he obviously played a ton the last 2 years, through something like 900 passes over the last 2 years, but he hasn't played a lot of football. He redshirt freshman year, his last year in high school was COVID year, no football. So there is a little bit. It's not Trey Lance, throwing like 10 passes over the course of 4 seasons, or whatever the heck that was when he came out of school. But there is a little bit more development that needs to take place. And the one thing I will tell you is over the course of the spring, particularly when it came to the footwork stuff, he got better, and you could see it. You could go from week to week. You'd be like, okay, like clear, they're working on some drills here, and he needs to clean that up. And you could tell he's thinking about it a little bit too much. And then we see him again the next week, and you'd be like, ooh, he cleaned it up. I mean, he's a really good athlete, so I'm not totally surprised that he's able to pick it up quickly. The big thing will be, and John obviously knows this, is when it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone can hit you versus what happens now, where they can rush you, but they're not gonna plant you on your back, and they're not gonna stick their helmet into your rib cage. That does he go back to some of the old habits? And right now, I think they've done a good job of trying to work that with him. And now he's here in the offseason, he's been spending time with a quarterbacks coach, Jeff Christensen, working on what they want him to work on. Right, like, hey, this is the track we're on. You go down, take that to Jeff, and that's what we want you to continue to do. Continue to work on that. So I'm excited to see him. It's another week or so before they get going. I'm excited to see what it looks like. Is he able to continue to carry that sort of progress that you saw in the spring into the summer? And then Jacoby was just steady Eddie, like all spring. I think
that's what he is.
I want to say like one bad practice maybe near the end, but by and large, like consistent. And he knows what he's here for. Like, he was their number one target. He was their only target. Like we talked about Gardner Minshew and some of these other guys in terms of bringing in a veteran free agent. They wanted Jacoby. Alex worked with him in Cleveland. He actually did really well with that 1 year in Cleveland where he was actually, I want to say, like top 10 in EPA and some of those advanced metrics for the time that he played. So he knows what he's here for. He's supporting Drake. He's pushing Drake. But it's not one of those situations where we just lived through where Bailey Zappi and Mac Jones wouldn't have peed on each other if they were on fire. Like there was just there was no relationship there. There was nothing happening. If that guy fell on his face, I'm not picking him up. Screw him. Like I want his job. I'm better. And the other guy's like, I'm the first round pick. You go screw. Like it just, there was no relationship there. There is now.
Yeah, I wish I were there for some of those awkward moments. That sounds awesome.
Well, look, like there were points over the last 2 years where one or the other would leave the quarterback room and go study in the wide receiver room because they didn't like being around each other. So, but that's part of the dysfunction that was, created by the coaching, the offensive. Yeah. It was just a whole bunch of politics and ego and stupidity. And you know what? You did what bad football teams did, and you end up picking third in the draft because you became a bad football team.
Right. Got you for a couple more minutes, and super thankful to have you joining us. There's some roster similarities between this Patriots team as well as this Bills team. Now, obviously, the Bills have, Josh Allen, who's an established quarterback, franchise quarterback in this league, and the Patriots hope that they've got their guy, right, in Drake Maye, which we've just been talking about. But the wide receiver room is one of those areas where for both teams, there's a little bit of not sure what we have. I'm not sure. We got guys, not sure who's going to come out on top, but kind of a best. I mean, we feel like here in Buffalo, we've got our top five for sure nailed down. We know who the top five are going to be. From what you've seen, from what you've heard, can you give us a top three, maybe a top four, or is it very much still just being shuffled?
So I think Jalen Polk was their second round pick out of Washington, had a terrific spring, and looks to me like he's probably going to be their best receiver. Now, whether that results in 100+ targets or who knows how the offense is going to totally work and the distribution of it. Pop Douglas looks like he's ready to take another step as a slot guy. Last year, a really good rookie year for a 6th-round pick out of Liberty. Looks better, looks quicker, looks stronger this year. He just got to stay healthy. He missed 3 or 4 games last year. A couple concussions, stuff you can't play around with. Javon Baker is sort of someone that I think if you talk to people about his overall talent level coming out of the draft, they'd tell you he was a 2nd-round pick. But there's a lot of off-field stuff with him that needs to sort of be worked through. He ends up going in the 4th round. He's something at the X that they haven't had in a while, more like a true X. I don't think they've really had that. So I think if he can develop the consistency and the professional habits that he needs to develop, then he could be a nice little piece for them. Those other guys, Bourne's coming off the torn ACL. He tore it in late October. He's ahead of schedule, and I know everybody always says that.
So was Von Miller.
Yeah, right. And that's what I keep telling people. Like, even if he is ready for September, which I'm dubious, just like, hey, put him on PUP, let him sit there for 6 to 8 weeks, and you're still talking about at least a year. Like I look at Breece Hall from the Jets. I know it's a running back, but like the cutting and having to take that contact. Breece Hall had the injury in October. He didn't become himself again until November of last year. By November, he was They're rolling, and that's that's what I'm looking at with Bourne. If Bourne was having a really nice year before he got hurt, it was unfortunate that he did. But if he can get back to that, then I would say those are probably your 4. Juju looks like he's probably a goner. I can't imagine that he makes the team. I know they're on the hook for like $9 million, but like, look, his knee was a mess last year. It just doesn't feel like there's a fit. This year he told us he was 100%, and then we watched him work on a side field for half a spring. Like, it just doesn't seem like his body has responded well to the knee injury from a couple of years ago. I mean, look, everybody in the league knew that his knee was messed up, and the Patriots still gave him 2 years and $25 million. So whether that was despite Jacoby Myers or Bill thought he was smarter than everybody else, I don't really know, but that didn't work. And Tyquan Thornton is probably on his last chance, a second-round pick a couple of years ago out of Baylor. Shows flashes, but he's another guy who just can't stay on the field. And I wonder if they're going to look at him and say, we don't have any past history with you. It's a new offense, new offensive coordinator, new head coach. Like, you're not our pick, and you've seen that. You guys see that all the time where they make a regime change. He's a high pick. Man, it doesn't matter. He wasn't our guy. Screw him. He's out. So
that's right.
That's kind of how I look at it right now. But it'll be interesting to watch the kids and how they develop because, Polk, Baker, and May, after every practice this spring, worked on the side field by themselves after practice was over. Even Baker, when he was dealing with something physically over the last month, he was out there with him, at least if not running the routes, being there or being next to Drake while Drake talks through things. And that's important. They got to develop that level of chemistry and relationship because eventually it's going to be Drake's team. And as Drake told us, like, hey, I'm the guy with the ball. They better kind of do what I want them to do because that's the best way they're going to get the football.
Yep.
Well, hey, Mike, I don't know if you're a fan or it's the job, but I have to say, after you recounting the wide receiver room in New England, I feel a lot better about our situation a little bit further to the west in Buffalo, because what you described right there, I was like, I'm going to surround Drake Maye with freaking pillows and bubble wrap for an entire season, because between the offensive line and the wide receiver room, I don't see the smart risk in putting him out there unless, as you said, he just supremely outperforms Jacoby Brissett. We are coming up kind of on time here. I don't know, Joe, if you have anything else to talk about on the offense, but defensively, I did a little bit of research. Obviously, you guys are strong there. I look at it as that front 7 is terrific. They graded out well. They did extremely well. Their takeaways weren't bad. But of course, New England was upside down in the turnover ratio. What do you see? Is it the secondary? Is that the biggest question mark? And then what are the wrinkles? I know you had some signings in the front 7, some youth still there. How do you sum it up there on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, a couple things. Like, to me, the cornerback position is a little bit wafer thin. Looks good on paper, but everybody here locally, at least most everybody, thinks Christian Gonzalez is the number 1 corner. And I would say, did he show us signs that he might be?
Right.
Sure, but he showed us signs for 3.5 games before he got hurt.
Right.
And didn't play again the rest of the year. So I don't know how he's going to respond to a bad game. I don't know how he's going to respond to a couple bad weeks in a row, right? And we know that position, the other guy gets paid too if you're going to be covered. If you look at the Patriots schedule this year, it's littered with legit number 1 receivers and really good quarterbacks. So it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get challenged. And he didn't really have to face that much last year. Again, just a 3.5 game sample size before he hurt the shoulder. John Jones, I think, is a good player, but he's old and he's older. He's been beat up the last couple seasons. He's had to play through some stuff. They were really thin. There were probably a couple points in the last 2 years where he might have normally had to tap out, but they were like, we don't have anyone else. Do what you can for us. Marcus Jones, the guy they drafted in the 2nd round, want him to be the nickel corner, the guy to replace John Jones eventually. He got hurt last year, missed all of, got hurt in the Miami game in week 2, so missed the rest of the season. And he wasn't playing well in camp before that. And I don't know where he fits. He's 5'8", he's not playing outside. He's going to have to be a nickel guy. And I don't know. I haven't seen enough there. So I have some wonders about that position. And then the front 7 is great if they're all there. And there's some questions about that because Matthew Judon is entering the last year of his deal. They owe him $6.5 million. That's, when you talk about the production that he's given you prior to the injury last year, and even, during the 3.5 games, he had 4 sacks and like 15 pressures. He says he's okay with it. But last year He conducted a hold-in. They moved money from this season into last season to get him, up to a more reasonable number. It doesn't sound like they're getting closer to any sort of extension or any sort of richening of the deal. And I just wonder if he's going to do the same thing again. He said that was trash last year. His direct quote was, "That was trash. I'm a football player. I just want to play."
Yeah.
But you got to wonder at $6.5 million if he says, "Well, what, can't you do something for me?" Right. And then Devon Godchaux, who's been, solid interior piece for them, he was kind of holding in during the course of this mandatory minicamp. He was there but did not do anything, ran on his own. He's not recovering from an injury. He wants more money. I think the Barmore contract, while smart, they gave him the extension ahead of time. They got him at a pretty good level when you consider how defensive tackles are getting paid here in the last couple of years. But that also sort of triggered well, wait, what about me? Like Godchaux looks at himself and says, "I've been a better player for you than Barmore is." Now, right. I don't think there's a comparison. Barmore to me can be a game-changing type player on the interior, but he's making $10 million. None of it's guaranteed, and does he sort of say, like, "I'm not playing unless you give me a new deal"? And do they say, "Screw you, we're not giving you the new deal"? And then you're sort of at loggerhead. So those are some things they're going to have to answer, I think. As good as it looks on paper, there's a lot of personal stuff that's coming into this that they're going to have to figure out in the next, month and a half before the season starts.
Super good.
It's the exact opposite.
Yeah,
it's the exact opposite of the offensive problem, right? You look great on paper on defense, but you got all this background stuff with contracts and personalities. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you're kind of like, do we have to look at the paper?
Look, my hope is, at least if for covering the team, they win, they lose, whatever. It's always better when they win because people get more excited about it. But I can't watch what I watched last year. Like, that offense was stick a fork in your eye, awful. Like, you come away like it can't get any worse than last week, right? Then you get into the next week, you're like, oh my God, it's worse. It's going in the other direction.
And then we gave you one. And then we just handed you one.
Yeah, that saved some people for a few weeks. So Mac Jones probably owes a bit of his check from last year to some of the guys in Buffalo because he probably should have been out before then. So
yeah, super fun conversation with you, Mike. Appreciate you. Mike, tell everybody where to find you before I ask you one final short question.
All right, so I am at the Boston Sports Journal. It is a subscription site, but it's like $35 for the year. So if you're into football, and I do league stuff as well. So that's easy peasy there. I'm on Twitter at Mike Giardi. I'm on Threads, the same thing. You can find me on Instagram, although on Instagram it's mostly pictures of my dog because I don't do as much video as I used to. So and then I'm also on I do morning radio a couple times a week here in Boston, WZLX 100.7 from 6 to 10 a.m.
That's awesome.
John, well, listen, Mike, you're very impressive. I went and prepared for this, which I never do, and I read some of your stuff, and I got to tell you, anybody out there who's a Buffalo Bills fan who wants to know a little bit more about their competition, you'd be wise to spend that $35 and consume some of Mike's content. And you know what, Mike? Get back on video on Instagram. That Italian Giardi. I mean, brother, you got to use that until it's gone, and you got it going on, brother.
Well, so this is as I said to you guys beforehand, it's it's like the calm before the storm. So I got in my vacation time before training camp starts, so I've got a good tan right now. Training camp, we're outside, I'm going to be getting tons of sun, but it'll be the farmer's tan. It'll stop right there. The neck tan, it gets kind of ugly. Looks good on the outside, but then you're like, man, it's a lot of white flesh everywhere else.
Yeah. Before I cut you loose, are you willing to give it up? Favorite wing spot in Buffalo? Favorite wing spot?
Is it lame if I say Elmo's? It's just like a consistent, that's kind of just
that's great.
When in doubt, that's kind of the spot,
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. No, I appreciate you throwing that out there. Elmo's is great. There's a lot of good spots, and Elmo's is absolutely one of them. Mike, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been tuned into On the Beat on the Overreaction Sports Network, powered by Believe. For me, for John, for Jerry, for Mike, appreciate you guys tuning in. Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.